story of Upbuild began in a monastery. On our quest to understand ourselves more deeply, we recognize that it is our attachment to our egos, our identities, that gets in the way of being our true selves. This podcast will help you understand your ego. It will help you better understand your inner world, the motivations, insecurities, and emotions that affect your every action and relationship. Welcome to Upbuilding the Self.
Hello, we are excitedly here for Upbuilding the Self. I'm Hari Prasad, and I'm with Michael, my partner here. And the subject today is bonus day, something which I've been very intrigued about. I've heard about from Michael, but in your reflection that you wrote about, what were the effects of the idea of bonus day, and how did it personally impact you and transform your understanding of yourself, believe it or not? That is very captivating. And the way that you wrote about it, I found to be incredibly insightful, helpful, honest, and touching. So I'm really eager to be able to offer that to those who are listening right now. And you wouldn't think that the subject of getting compensation or a bonus would lead to these insights and even have a transformative effect. So I want to start with that. How did you start to correlate bonus day with these kinds of deeper questions?
Thank you, Hari. And I need to take a step back first before we even dive in here, because it's totally crazy that we're having this conversation right now about bonus day. It was something I never thought that I would speak about, my experience of bonus day. I worked for 11 years at Goldman Sachs, so I had 11 bonus days throughout that time there. And it was something that just felt like I would never share this in a public forum, certainly not the deeper ways that it affected me. And then also, if you think about our relationship, we met more than 10 years ago. You were a monk at the time. I was a hard driving trader at Goldman in New York City. And we were in a monastery, and just having this conversation here today is totally wild. And yet there's also no person in the world, and I can honestly say that, who I'd rather have this conversation with. So I'm really grateful to be having it here with you today.
That's so beautiful. Thank you. I'm very honored. And yeah, that only makes me more excited, which I didn't know was possible. So please, what led to these deeper questions about bonus day?
The intensity of the experience. I mean, in some ways, it's a ritual that became somewhat standardized, an experience that I felt comfortable with, and something that would repeat itself year after year. And at the same time, when I would go through that experience, the intensity of it was off the charts. The whole life cycle of how it would be set up in the months leading into year end, and then what would happen in the first couple of weeks in January as people started whispering about, what was going to happen, the date that it was going to happen. And then more than anything, the day of. And going through that experience of walking into the room and getting the bonus, and then how that number stayed with me throughout the course of the year. So it was something that was there with me. And it's embarrassing to admit this, 365 days a year. If that doesn't spark deeper questions, I don't know what would.
Wow. So even from reading your piece, I didn't know that for the entire year, I didn't make that connection, that it was day in and day out. This was your consciousness. It was around bonus day, that somehow that was so larger than life that every other day had some relation to it.
Yeah. Well, not consciously in my consciousness.
Yeah.
But unconsciously. So some days very consciously in my consciousness, and other days much more unconsciously in my consciousness.
Yeah. And so that sparked deeper questions when you started to realize how much this had overtaken your consciousness and you're reflecting on the intensity of the experience. It's like, what's going on here? What's really happening? Is that right?
That's right. When we think about self-worth, I mean, in some ways that feels like everything. That feels like, how much am I worth as a person? But that concept of worth, it can feel like, picking up a handful of sand and just the sand kind of falls back down to the beach. It's like, how do I even get a grasp on how much I'm worth? And compensation, job title, promotion, what our bosses think of us, it's a little bit more of a concrete way of getting a sense of our worth. And we can talk about all the unhealthy ways that manifests itself. But when you're grasping for answers to that question of how much I'm worth, and I think all of us naturally do that, something like compensation can be an easy target to hold on to.
Very well said. Yes, yes. Okay, so bring us into bonus day at Goldman Sachs.
Okay. Oh man, I'm nervous
I want the vivid description.
Yeah. So usually it would be the second or third week in January. It would be the day after the earnings call. So the Q4 earnings would be announced sometimes in January. And since it was the fourth quarter, there would also be the results for the full year. So at that point, it would be clear how much the firm had made over the entire year. And also a certain portion of that earnings was dedicated towards compensation. So at that point, the full amount of compensation that would be handed out to the employees would be known. And so then the next day, the following day, the partners would deliver on an individual basis that number to all of the employees. And so what would happen is you'd come in the morning, and it's a regular day. It might be a Tuesday, it might be a Thursday. It's a regular business day. The stock market's open. Everyone's got their job to do, but it didn't feel like a regular day. It felt like a day where nothing else mattered except that meeting that you were going to have with the partner. And so when I was on the trading floor in New York, it was a football field worth of people. We maybe had 600-700 people on the trading floor, 10 rows or so. So maybe 10 rows of 70 people and no pillars or anything in between. So you could just see 700 people when you were standing on that floor. And you knew that 700 people over the course of the morning would be called into an office at some point to have their number bestowed upon them. And so everyone would come, they'd sit down just as normal, and everyone was pretending to do their jobs. It's kind of like on Cyber Monday, everyone goes into the office after Thanksgiving and pretends to be working, but they're really shopping. This is sort of a similar experience. Everyone's pretending to do their jobs, and yet all they're thinking about, at least all I was thinking about, was this meeting that was coming up. And we had these big phone dashboards that would have the phone line for all of the members of our team. So maybe 10 or 12 other people. And so whenever anybody's phone line rang on the team, your dashboard would light up and you would see where the number was coming from. And so during the course of a regular day, you would see other people's names from the firm pop up, meaning that they were calling, or you would see outside numbers that didn't have a name associated with it. But on bonus day, what would pop up on the caller ID is conference room 4 or conference room 5 or conference room 6, meaning that somebody was calling from conference room, let's call it 5, to the desk. And that's kind of weird because why would anyone call from the conference room? But on bonus day, the partner who ran your team was sitting in the conference room calling the people, asking them to come in. So what would happen is the most senior person who didn't have a corner office would get called first. And that person would pick up their phone, which was also very rare. Usually the junior members, the lower ranking members of the team would pick up the phone for the senior members. But as I write in the piece, on bonus day, you would pick up your phone. And then what was really striking about that was that this person, the most senior member of the team, would answer the phone as if they were a little scared kid. I mean, these people were making millions of dollars and they walked around with their chests puffed out and confidence that they were portraying. And yet when they answered this phone, it was like their mother had just called and caught them with their hand in the cookie jar, some innocent little trouble that they had gotten into, but they were scared. And so this guy would go off into the conference room and he would disappear for a few minutes, maybe 3-4 minutes, and he would come out and everyone would still be pretending to do their work. But in their peripheral vision, they were really checking out what was happening in that conference room. And eventually I would get called and I would pick up the phone in the same sort of scaredy cat way as my colleagues and go off into the room. And the partner would be sitting in that room with a big stack of papers, and he would give you some qualitative assessment about how the firm did over the past year, how the division did, how your specific desk did. And then he would deliver the number, which was called PATC, your per annum total compensation. And that was your total of your base salary plus your bonus. And then he would give you a bunch more information around, how much of the bonus would be paid in stock and when the money would come and all of these other details. But for me, nothing else registered except the number. You go back to your seat and you're sitting there with that number, and other people are continuing to cycle in and out of these conference rooms. But it's that experience of going back to your seat and realizing like, this is it. This is my number for the next year. Now I'm starting at zero in some way as I, look ahead to what's coming for the next year. But this is it. For every day that I wake up for the next 364 days, I won't have another number. This is the only number that I'll have.
Yes. It's pretty epic as you describe it, and the impact on my sense of self-worth, as you mentioned as well. I can really feel that. What I'm curious about is a little more on what you describe in your writing about the posturing that would take place as a result. There was a lot of angling and posturing and even pretending. Tell us about that.
That showed up in two ways most concretely. The first would be the posturing months ahead as the bonuses were getting talked about and set. And one of the things that I felt the need to do was to share all of my accomplishments for that year with my boss, with my boss's boss, with anyone who had any power, to let them know, they should have all the numbers. They should be aware of the reviews and all of those things. But just in case they weren't, here's the list of the 10 most important things that I did this year, or here's how much money I made in this situation. And here's this client that I spoke to who never would have done any business with the firm unless I was speaking to them. And this is how much they contributed to our bottom line. Just various pieces of information that I could share. So there was this sense that I need to share this with them so that when they go into those bonus meetings, they'll have good ammunition to pay me money. The other thing that would happen is from them to me, there would be this concept called managing down. This was not something I'd written about in the piece, but it's very striking, where regardless of how well the bonuses would end up in the end, there was always a sense that they needed to lower your expectations. So there would be, various excuses. Oh, the firm had a big legal expense this year, so that's probably going to lower bonuses a bit. Or, this other division didn't do so well, and so we want to make sure that we're retaining the people over there. So maybe some of the money that your division would normally get is going to be shuttled over to this division. And so you would start to hear some of these less positive pieces of news as bonus day was approaching. And that was meant to lower your expectations, because there's a big sense out there that happiness is your results over your expectations. And so if I can lower the denominator, then I can raise how people react in the end. So that was certainly some of the posturing that went into bonus day.
What was the result of that that ideology of creating results that would be above expectations?
It worked. I mean, it's crazy, but it worked. We're speaking kind of loosely about some of these things, but this speaks to some of the more serious point here, which is that all of this stuff is so flimsy. Like, how could that work? Why would that work? And yet it worked. And so if that doesn't tell us that all of this idea of basing our self-worth on these extrinsic measures is flimsy, I mean, it's great evidence for that.
Yeah, yeah. And going back to the posturing once more, what was your own relationship with posturing on the day of?
Yeah, so that was the posturing leading up. And then what would happen is you would receive this number, and at least for me, it felt like, okay, now the spotlight is on and you have to react to it. And so rather than reacting from a genuine place, there's a question of how should I react? And what am I trying to achieve through my reactions? And if the answer to the second question was I'm trying to get paid more next year, which it often was the case, then I needed to balance. I needed to come up with a very well-crafted response. So the first thing I needed to make sure was that I got above a certain threshold of this guy's an okay person. He's not a total spoiled brat, or he's not completely selfish. He's at least something resembling a team player. So I have to act with some sort of satisfaction and appreciation, but not too much. Because if I let them know that I'm too satisfied with the number, well, then they probably paid me too much. And then next year they'd be able to lower that. And if they understand that I'm dissatisfied, then, maybe there's a thought that I'm going to be looking at another firm or for another opportunity. And so that would cause them to treat me better and possibly pay me more next year. So again, it's crazy, ridiculous, embarrassing, shameful to admit all of this stuff, but this was certainly how it played out over the years.
Such a unique window into an experience that is, very, very gripping to think about. When the stakes are so high, my self-worth is being pinned on this experience. It just strikes me that it's such a game on both sides. You're each trying to sort of outwit the other and bluff, and really just trying to win when you're supposed to be on the same team, right? You're supposed to be serving the mission of the organization together, and instead you're trying to outsmart each other to get what is mine, right? Which is actually not ours in the first place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well said.
I'm thinking of like the poker matches and the concept of a poker face. That's what's coming to my mind here, is like everyone has to have the perfect poker face. And I want to know, what's the effect of that on you personally and on what you observed of others?
We often talk about in our work at Upbuild the correlation between ego and trust.
I was just going to say trust is coming to my mind. Like,
yeah.
You want to feel these people have my back and I have their back. And that's the most inspiring and effective environment to work in. And this is so counter to that. So please continue.
Yeah. And, this is not at all about bashing investment banking culture. I mean, there's plenty of improvements that need to be made in that culture for our society to be better off. But this is, first of all, it's really about taking personal responsibility for how we've exported our sense of self-worth to these extrinsic measures. But this posturing, it comes from our insecure egos. It comes from us trying to prove something about ourselves. And so there can't be trust, because if I'm trying to prove to you that I'm something that I'm not, and I'm not telling you the truth, how can you trust me? And if it's the same thing on the other side, if I'm not being told the full story, or I'm not being treated fairly, even though that concept of fairness is pretty hard to measure as well, then why would I trust you? And the effect of that is then we can't show up. It's this sort of vicious circle that then we can't show up as our real selves because there is no trust to be vulnerable and to show our full selves, which breaks trust even more. And it becomes this never-ending circle of I have to put on a mask just to go to work every single day, and I need protection, and I'm not letting anyone in. And this becomes a cultural thing. It's not just an effect on me and my boss, it's team members, and round we go here.
Yeah. And what would you say to the people who might think, oh, these are just problems for the rich, for the wealthy, for people that are seeing sums of money that I don't even have a concept of? What do we say to that?
Yeah, thank you for asking that question. I think that was part of my nerves writing this piece and also sharing this on this podcast, is because I think that can be the reaction. But what I would encourage people to do is to think, where in my life do I export my self-worth to? What extrinsic measures are in my life that I base my self-worth on? And a lot of those, regardless of income level, regardless of wealth, regardless of status, a lot of that will be numbers. A family member of mine shared in reaction to my piece that her weight was something that she used as a measure of her self-worth. And I think that's a very common one. So even if it's not financial related numbers, there are plenty of numerical things in our life that we tend to look at as a way to measure our self-worth because we haven't done the hard work to look a little deeper than that.
I'm right there with you. Yes. I was also just thinking about Mother Teresa, and we've quoted her before in really sharing about how she would look at the wealthy people on the streets of New York City, and she would think there's more starvation, there's more suffering in their hearts than in the hearts of the impoverished people who are physically starving in the streets of Calcutta. And so empathy is needed for all living beings. And whether it's dressed up a certain way or whether it's hidden, suffering is suffering. And that's the human condition. And I'm thinking about how Upbuild is really aimed at serving and healing and freeing us, ultimately freeing us completely of that suffering of the human condition, regardless of where we stand. And you'll see it infiltrating, the worlds of the well-to-do as well as the worlds of those who don't have much.
Yeah, thank you for that. That Mother Teresa quote is also striking to me. And I can honestly say that the reason that I decided to join Upbuild was because of my own suffering that was created from this never-ending treadmill of needing more validation. And not to say that those impetuses and impulses have gone away. They haven't. They're still there and quite strong. But the metaphor that I often share with people is you can learn Japanese by moving to France, but it's a lot easier to learn Japanese by moving to Japan. And for me, being on the floor at an investment bank, at a trading floor at an investment bank, it wasn't quite right. It wasn't quite the place that I needed in order to explore these deeper questions and to really look at the suffering that I was experiencing. Because on the trading floor, it was just the suffering without an awareness of the suffering, or the projection of confidence was so strong that I wasn't as in touch with that suffering, but it was still there and it still left a hole.
That's very, very powerful. Yes, absolutely. I'm also thinking about how much undiscovered suffering there is because it's unconscious and it's so compulsive and there's so much projection that it would help to just step back and ask ourselves with great honesty and great desire to know the answer. How am I suffering? How am I actually suffering? And then we will more than likely find that there is an unfortunate wellspring, but in that wellspring is the ticket to climb out of the well. So coming back to the question about self-worth and the fallacy of extrinsic measures like, my bonus, my compensation, my weight, all these different things that we equate. I think there are countless versions of that. You so nicely pointed out what was impacting you over all of those years at Goldman Sachs. But this is happening all the time in so many different ways. We're really anxious to find something that can show me I'm worthy. That is a suffering. That is perhaps the deepest suffering, or it's certainly linked to the deepest suffering. I'm desperate to know I'm enough. I'm enough. I'm enough. This shows it. This means it. And therefore I prove and I defend. I prove and I defend to make sure that I feel enough. But it's never really enough. So what do we do with that, Michael?
As you said, we first need to be brutally honest that that is the case. And the way that we know that is we've gotten these things in the past and we still have felt that emptiness. We still have felt that suffering. So the next question we can ask, and this is a question that I pose in the piece, is who would I be if I lost my money, my job title, my status? You can add in anything else that might be personally relevant for you and how you measure self-worth. And really sit with that question. Who would I be if I lost all of those extrinsic measures?
Yeah, that question is so critical. I worry sometimes, what if the answer comes up for people, well, nothing, or I don't know? Then what?
That was the answer for me. And many days still, that is the answer for me. There's nothing wrong with that being the answer as long as we're willing to sit with that for longer and also peel a little deeper. I think one of the directions that we can point people towards is starting to think about what are the qualities that I have that I can offer to other people that have a longer shelf life, that even when I don't have those extrinsic factors or completely independent from those extrinsic factors, that still are things that I can offer to other people.
Yeah. And maybe you can just reiterate, because I think this is so important. I don't want anyone to miss it. What is really the benefit of asking this question? Who would I be if I lost all my money, if I lost my job, my status, my extrinsic measures of self-worth? What is the benefit of that question, even if I come up feeling so short, or it's even worse, it's terribly threatening?
Well, the answer to that question is also the answer to the question, who are you with all of those things? It's just we haven't given ourselves enough credit. We've sold ourselves short. The other thing that happens is there's a lot of frustration from people who feel like other people are treating them in a transactional way. That might be with people at work. It might be even our own family members. It might be everyone that we interact with. And we're wondering, why are all of these people treating me in such a transactional way, like treating me as objects? And what this investigation and introspection was helpful for me to see in thinking about that was, that's what I'm doing to myself. And so how could I possibly expect others to treat me any differently?
Beautiful. Yeah, I'm thinking also that when I became a monk, I had this terror that I will amount to nothing because I'll be getting off of the face of the planet. And maybe I'll not even be hireable if I leave the monastery. If I get my monastic training and then I go back into the world, which was my plan at that time, I will have no value. I'll have no worth. And it was so intense to wrestle with that. And I had this sense of, well, wait, that's society putting a stamp on you and you're accepting it. You're actually like lapping it up and saying, yes, I won't have a worth, or allowing society to dictate that. And it's a very vulnerable place to be. I know. And still to this day, I grapple with, am I doing enough? Am I enough? Am I a good enough instrument in trying to serve others, which is perhaps the most refined way that our egos know how to approach this subject, and which actually starts to go beyond the ego, which is the benefit. That's a good thing. But still, we carry the residue of not feeling enough. I carry that residue myself, asking that question, well, how can I be enough? How can I be enough? And feeling that insecurity. So it is a vulnerable place to be. But the thing is, there are no shortcuts. It doesn't disappear. It doesn't go away because I decide that, I'm not going to go there. I'm not going to ask that question. I must ask that question. I must ask, who would I be really without all of these externals? And I love what you said about the qualities. That is really my meditation, investing in qualities that I know are beneficial to me and to everybody.
Beautiful. Yeah. And as we're thinking about people in our lives, who really sees me for the real me? And have a conversation with those people about the qualities that they see in you that are your real self. So we all have friends, people in our lives who love our egos, who love the masks that we put out there, and they invest and validate those egos. But we need to look in different places than that. We need to look for people in our relationships who really see us for our real selves.
And do you have any tip for how to find such people, or how to know when you found such people?
First of all, they're usually walking the path themselves. And then, and Razanath will often share this, when you come in touch with someone's authenticity, it's an experience of the heart. It's hard to put into words, but there's just a sense that this person is being who they really are, and it moves you. And so paying attention to when we feel moved by the presence of other people and understanding why.
And then they will help us to feel our inherent worth, independent of all of these measures to try to prove our worth. Yeah.
That's right. And also, because we share this planet as human beings and as souls, the qualities that we see in them are also the intrinsic qualities that we likely have within ourselves, even if we don't know that.
Beautiful, beautiful. So yeah, it inspires us to find those qualities in ourselves and really work to bring them out and to remove the coverings. Yeah, this is very attractive. And I think it's extremely beneficial for people to take to heart these questions about really, how can I be worthy without these external measures, and seek people that can give me that experience from their own experience. They may not have arrived at perfect security of self-worth. They may not be completely self-realized and recognizing their true self in its fullest glory. But anyone who's doing this work has very valuable jewels to offer back. And we can, instead of posturing in the other direction, we can angle intentionally towards what we know to be true and what we're experiencing more and more of in spite of the obstacles on the path. So with that, I just want to turn it back to you, Michael. Anything that you would share in closing?
These extrinsic measures, they're not bad. And it's not that we shouldn't go after them. It's not that we shouldn't try to make money, get promotions, but we have to recognize as we're doing all of that stuff that they're not us, that they don't define us. They can't define us, that in reality, we're actually so much bigger than those things. by giving them the power that we give them, we make ourselves smaller than those things. But our real self is so much bigger and so much better than any of that stuff. But in order to get there, we first need to go through the intense, painful, sometimes long-lasting process of really seeing where we're suffering, really seeing where we've given up our power to those extrinsic measures. And from that point, there's so much potential.
Amazing. Let us do it. I feel like I mean, we're trying to walk this path, but we always need fuel. We always need fuel to keep going one step after another. And I feel like so much enthusiasm from the way that you're speaking and your own realizations. I'm very, very grateful. And I am super eager and inspired to keep walking this path. And I really hope that everyone gets that fuel who's listening.
Thank you, Hari Prasad. It was nerve-wracking going in, but I'm really glad we had this conversation.
Such a privilege. Thank you, Michael, and thanks to everyone. See you soon.
Thank you for listening to Upbuilding the Self. Upbuild is a leadership development company that offers workshops, coaching, and other services to help you on the path towards being your best self, free from the shackles of the ego. To learn more about our work, visit our website, upbuild.com, and sign up for our newsletter to gain access to podcasts, reflections, and upcoming events. If you enjoyed this episode, please go to iTunes to leave us a review so that others can find and benefit from the podcast. We look forward to being with you again next time.